Mansplaining. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome. How's it going? As you come on in, say hi. Christian, how's it going? Good to see you.
Great. Yeah, I'm good.
Good stuff. All right. So this week is kind of like a follow-up of last week, but at a more broad, kind of like taking a step back and looking at this in a more generic sense, right? We're looking at scandals and how they affect political decisions, and whether or not these scandals are truly what you would call a disqualifier for a political candidate or not.
Yeah.
And we're gonna look at a lot of different scandals, of course, as America has a wealth of them to go through over the last 250 years or some odd of our life, and especially in the last like 100 years, we seem to like collect them almost like baseball cards. So we're going to just jump right in. One thing that I wanted to mention is something I mentioned last week, is that there is a generic pattern among voters, among the left and the right, to choose candidates based on different overarching priorities, right? And on the left, it is often more common nowadays to have a voter pick a candidate based on that person's reputation or character, right? Their perceived moral character or ethical character. And on the right, it is often more common to see someone prioritize their policies or their essentially the way that they plan to execute the office while they're in office, rather than holding their personal life against them, right? Although you can always
Like character assassination, has become part of the political playbook. But does it work? Are we post to that anymore? Right?
Yeah. Good question.
Right. So anyway, I'll let you keep going.
But anyway, so that's just a pattern. And that isn't to say that you won't find people on the right who are very, very much worried about the moral character of a person, a political pundit that's in office. And that isn't to say that you won't find people on the left that are very concerned about policy, but you often find that those are the things they look for. And Trump is a perfect example because he brings out, the extremes on both sides, right? So on the left, the attacks against Trump are very much so about his moral character, right? They're always like, he's not a good person. He cheats on his.
Yeah. He's a womanizer. Yeah.
Right. He's a misogynist. He cheats on his wife. He's had, I don't know how many affairs usually with porn stars and stuff like that. And, and of course, this Epstein thing is just the newest in a long string of, look at Trump. Trump is not a good person, right? But you often don't necessarily hear them attack his policies quite so much as his moral character. Not that they don't have plenty of complaints about his policies too. And on the right, of course, you'll have a lot of people on the right kind of overlook his moral character in favor of the policies that he's already enacted that are in line with the things that they would like to see out of a politician. And so that's just a generic pattern. That isn't to say that, like, again, you won't have.
Well, all right. So I mean, here's a more recent example was Kamala Harris. I'll come back to her, right?
Sure.
But one of the classic example that we might be post character assassination was French President Francois Hollande. And he was in a train accident.
Yes.
Right? Which was kind of a big deal. Like, you're covering a train that comes off the rails, causes big accident. Oh, hey, presidential candidate happens to be on that train. Well, this is newsworthy. Right. Oh, he was traveling by himself from out in the country back to Paris, and then it was widely reported, everybody, that he'd been visiting his mistress.
Right.
So rather than this being a negative thing, scandal or anything like that, the effect was this made his popularity and favorability ratings go up.
Yep.
Because France is weird. France is not America. So they said, "Oh, he was visiting his mistress. I want to vote for this guy more." At least that's what they told pollsters. And so the media in France just said, "All right, we're not going to cover people's personal life, especially because Hollande was a center-right president, right? Because we don't want to be, giving people things that will make people like them anymore. That's not our job.
Right,
Right.
right, of course.
So and in subsequent elections, nobody has lobbed really anything about anybody's affairs or marital fidelity or sexual things about that. Even the current president of France is married to a woman 30 years his senior,
Right.
right? Who was his teacher, right? Something that would be howled at in America, and they were just like humdrum,
No big deal.
whatever. We're not going to even dig into this, even the spicy details of it, because that could make people like him even more or something like that. It was just sort of like evaluate him on his policies, not on, it's sort of like maybe the attitude is he who without sin cast the first stone. That we all have had problems when it comes to the other sex, and we shouldn't judge. Though we hold our leaders and public figures to really high standards, and I don't think that's wrong. So
No.
this is sort of the crux, and this is part of why I want to debate. And I'm interested in our listeners there and our watchers here, their opinion as well. So Kamala Harris, one thing the right used to lob at Kamala Harris during the campaign a lot was that the beginning of her rise to political prominence
Left her
was
way to the
she
top.
had a dating relationship,
Yep.
a romantic relationship with Willie Brown. Now, for those of you not from California, might undersell the importance of how big a player in Democrat politics Willie Brown was. While he was never the governor, he was Speaker of the House for a long time, Speaker of the Assembly, always a kingmaker kind of thing of who's going to be the next kind of stuff. Huge figure of influence, and even though he was many years her senior, he dates it, and all of a sudden Kamala Harris becomes the prominent person to become the attorney general of the state of California, yada yada, and become the next senator and things like this. And so people were like, oh, well, they were never married. She has no children. So they lobbed these sort of things at her. I don't think that stuck. I don't think she lost the election at all because of her indiscretion. People were more worried about, at the end of the day, her competency and the policy she would enact as president. Nobody cared about what she did to become a politician or to raise her profile, who she dated. And I think to a large degree, people might say like, oh yeah, Trump, I wish he hadn't done this, but we got to do something about the border, and the other side's not, and so I'm not saying, so this is like character matters to a point. We have to trust that they're going to do what they say, but is this is the media still thinking that that negative things or scandals about politicians really at the end of the day, factor into who we're going to vote for? Or is it just to sell magazines and get ratings?
Right. Yeah. So, and I think one of the things too that it's changed over time. I think that, and I even called my father to talk about this a little bit. I asked him earlier today. I said, what was the political terrain around JFK? Because as you all know, JFK was a known womanizer, right? He was a known. He slept with Marilyn Monroe and a number of other women, at the time. And I was
Person on his staff. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just curious to from my father, I was like, so what was that like a partisan thing at the time? Did the media report it? Did they not? What was the deal behind it? And he told me that it was very much hidden from public view. The Secret Service would sneak these women in and out. It was supposed to be kept hush hush. And even though it was kind of assumed that this was going on, nobody wanted to admit it. Even people on the other side, because at the time, the office of the presidency held greater esteem than the individual indiscretions of a single man, right? So even though they knew JFK was cheating on his wife, one of the most attractive first ladies ever to exist, by the way, which is remarkable, right? But even though that was taking place, like even my father's father, who was a diehard Republican, like diehard conservative, didn't want to hear about it. He's like, you would say, well, you think JFK's cheating? He's like, it was just like, don't worry about it because it doesn't matter we can't deal with the embarrassment as a nation, right? And that was where there was like all solidarity behind the understanding of like, even if we don't like the person, even if we don't agree with their policies, it was more about protecting the office of the presidency and, you know, the preservation of the nation's reputation. But now I think it's very much changed. I think Clinton was a lot of firsts, right? Like even as you went through, like Richard Nixon had a couple of scandals, especially Watergate, which was big, which wasn't a sexual indiscretion, but it was big. But you notice Richard Nixon again still he tanked his personal career so that he wouldn't have to be impeached, which was almost guaranteed to come
Yeah,
and
because
remove him
because
from
he
office.
respected the office so much,
Right.
right?
But when it
And
came
then
to Clinton,
Reagan, yeah, yeah,
he was just like, nah, go ahead, do what you want to do. And everybody knew Clinton was guilty of perjury and obstruction of justice and cheating on his wife, that
right.
nobody cared. It was just like, so what? We're Democrats. We're Republicans. We're going to vote along party lines. And that's
Yeah.
how it is. And you can't win because you don't have 2/3 of the Senate, no matter what's going on.
No, I will say that, and it might seem like Clinton didn't face any consequences, but he did, right? And there are seen to his everlasting. The Clinton had a lot of political gifts, right? Was a great public speaker and all these things, and was shorted on them. Couldn't reach his political potential because of his failings with women, right? And that to throw that all away for a tawdry affair with somebody that, you know, the power level is on your staff, right? An intern in your White House. It's one thing if this was just some woman he met and they had, you know,
Right.
And so it was sort of there was power dynamics, this sort of things that were brought down, but and while he wasn't impeached for it, he was not. He was a lame duck president the minute the scandal came in. He ceased to be a factor. His policies, he could not move forward. Right. Newt Gingrich ran the country.
Yeah.
Right. And whoever was running for president next, which Al Gore and George W. Bush. Right. It was the next presidential. Like he was. The rest of his presidency was just fighting not to be impeached. He ceased to be an active person. And so and because America does care about these things, right? So that now, but we've jumped forward 25 years.
Yes.
And part of the thing is like, I think it's the story of the boy who cried wolf a little bit, or with Donald Trump, right? So the media has and the opposition has so been so keyed up against Donald Trump. They've been willing to make up outright lies, which we learned, right? The Russian dossier, that he had some Russian prostitute pee on him, urinate on him in some Russian hotel, things like that. Like really like dark stuff that they were just making up lies about it. And so the lack of credibility from the opposition, like anything that comes from the Democrats about Trump, we are not going to believe. And lack of credibility from the media saying that he's a threat when he's clearly not, that they have poisoned their own credibility, right? This is the media. So anything that they would bring, even Stormy Daniels, they'd be like, we don't believe this is real. Nobody ever treated it as real because they, you know, even if he admitted it or something, we could see that Melania was embarrassed by it or whatever, that he just wanted to pay her off and a mistake that he made with this. But we would not accept the reporting, especially when it came from the Democrats. They have no credibility. And they were willing, they were crying wolf on everything. Everything was a scandal. They were opposing everything. Everything was, and it wasn't. The economy was still really good up until COVID, right? He was being stymied on some things, but you know, he was still learning. He wasn't a threat to democracy. The judges he appointed all saw the Constitution as a limiting principle. Like it wasn't the end of America as we know it. And sure enough, when he lost the election, America went on, and now he's come back. And now to yell at him for, you know, supposedly indiscretions with women before he became a political figure was trying to lead the country, it's maybe slightly interesting, but it doesn't raise to the level of disqualifying. I think most people kind of are shrugging. Like, if it came down to, even with this latest sort of revelations about whether voting for Trump or Kamala Harris, I don't think these type of scandals would be a tiebreaker against Trump.
Yeah, no, and they weren't. And then that's well, one of the problems is, right, it's like it's almost become so prevalent among politicians to have scandals that, like, it's almost right. It's kind of like you mentioned. It's like crying wolf. It's almost like we've gotten desensitized to it. It's like, who is that guy, that the North Carolinian senator, Edward, I can't remember his name right now, but
not a senator, the congressman in the wheelchair. That one,
yeah. That, like, people. It's like it just happens all the time, right? And the fact that Kamala slept her way to the top. Now, one of the things, though, that I will push back at a little bit, which is
Sure.
it's unfortunate, but Trump has raised the bar when it comes to scandals, right? Like, he's gotten to he's like next level, and he, in a way, has been responsible for desensitizing us to it, right? Because it's like almost like Trump has so many scandals and has had so many scandals before he was even in the political eye, that we're almost like, yeah, like, it's Trump. Like, and I hate that it's become that. Like, I absolutely, it's gotten to the point where it's like, if you told me tomorrow that Trump cheated on his wife with a porn star, I'd be like, like, I'd be like, duh. Right?
Well,
like,
it must be a day that ends in Y, right?
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Right. I'm gonna die of not surprise. Yeah. Well, he's in the Mike Tyson zone, meaning any sort of rumor that comes out, we sort of at first think it could be true, right? And so because of that, that's the sort of dossiers they wanted to use that against him.
Right.
That people, if they can character assassinate him with enough, that they can even be outright lies, but enough people see it's like, Donald Trump, this might be real. This could have happened. I can see this happening. He's pretty crazy. And that's not journalism.
Right.
That's gossip. And so there's a place for gossip mags, right, and tabloids, but we separate them from serious journalism. I was telling Eddie this. I was listening to NPR the other day, and they were interviewing a man who's written 4 books on Donald Trump. Right. Supposedly this guy's an expert. Well, I don't think the NPR host had read any of those books, because they're all just gossip books, right? Because when they dug into this guy's statements about how he was saying Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were, the best friends that any of them had ever had. And he's seen a picture of Trump hanging out by a swimming pool with a bunch of women in bikinis, and they're like, he's like, I think that's probably in the files. And they're like, what proof do you have of this? What? And he had nothing, right? And you can kind of see the NPR people kind of embarrassed, like, oh, you're not really a journalist. You're just passing on gossip. You're a gossip columnist. And so much gossip gets represented. And this guy was trying to represent himself as a hard journalist, that we should believe what he's saying, like it's being reported by a real journalist, and it's just not. It's a different standard, right? But with Trump, like, there's so much gossip out there.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. And now anything, even legitimate scandals, even when we have Fox News or the Wall Street Journal, which used to be the gold standard. If the Wall Street Journal reported something, it was not gossip.
Right. It
was journalism.
Right.
But they have lost so much credibility. It's dismissed.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, so you're gossiping about something. It's not seen as disqualifying. And this is the media's own fault. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to claw their way back, because, you claw their way back by being credible to both sides, and not just reporting on gossip.
Yeah, I don't think they can, unfortunately. I saw a giant debate between was Douglas Murray and Matt Taibbi against 2 prominent left-wing figures the other day about whether or not, the media has retained its credibility in the public eye. And I don't understand how they even hoped to come close to winning that debate. Douglas Murray just slaughtered him. Like, because there's way too many examples, and part of the problem, part of the game of Trump, as I mentioned, has desensitized us. But the other part of the thing that's desensitized us too is that the left wing media has held sway in the media sphere for so long. Like, aside from Fox News, there really wasn't any like right wing presence in the media. That we were just so far behind the game.
Well, right wing
for a long
radio. Yeah,
right. Radio, but like
yeah.
nobody listens to radio anymore, right?
Yeah.
So like, it was just Fox News was like the one bashing against, MSNBC, CNN, NPR, New York Times, da da da. Like I could just go on and list like 40
BBC,
other.
yeah,
Right.
Bloomberg, Al Jazeera,
right. And so the
Washington
problem
Post.
is when it gets to that point, you're to hear that somebody in the right is part of a scandal is just par for the course, because assassination pieces are just drafted every single day against somebody on the right, and usually that person is Trump. And the left, you just don't see it as often, just because the right wing just doesn't have control of the media. Now that Fox News is a much bigger program, right, and now that they have like 40% control or whatever of the media sphere, then you start to hear more of it. But even then, and then it's just like a more slightly more balanced, but it's still an overblown, like one side attacks the other over and over and over again. And I'm like,
Well, I'll push back on a little bit. The Drudge Report, right, which was independent. They weren't part of the mainstream media, but they got legitimacy by exposing the Lewinsky affair, right? They had this golden age between about 2008 and 2020. Well, really Trump, 2016, I guess, where they were really driving the news cycle as far as right-wing perspectives. He was considered, Matt Drudge was considered a little more on the right, and would the only hope that the right-wing or conservative stories would get play is if they started getting a lot of traction on the Drudge Report, right?
okay,
and so online, that was the online sphere, right? We're not on. We could be on TV, but we're choosing to be on YouTube here. But the online sphere has grown. Online journalism, research, debate, because people want to hear opinions, analysis from people that haven't been sold out to corporate interests, aren't being censored by a news director, right? When Eddie and I speak to you, there's nobody to say, hey, our sponsor doesn't want you to do this, or hey, could you hit on this fair debate? Could you hit 5 points on this side and 2 points on this side?
Hey, but look, if there's anybody out there that wants to pay us vast sums of money to do that, I might be willing to listen to you. No, I'm kidding.
But and this is the credibility. People could see it so nakedly in the mainstream media that they weren't portraying, they weren't giving equal time to both sides. They were people that understand persuasive writing could just see very clearly that they were weighting things for one side or the other to sway opinion, and it was usually always in favor of the left or the government. The government is the solution. Bigger government, and and there was an inevitability to this, that Obama said, this is the right side of history. We're always going to be moving more and more left. Right now we've seen, the next generation of young people coming up are more conservative, that it is possible to actually swing the country back to the right.
Yeah.
That the left became so far out there that the media could not normalize it. That's one of the big things. The left has always been weird, but the media was like, no, this is normal. This is totally, typical. There's nothing freaky about this. But the media couldn't even do that with the latest far, far left. Hey, we're not going to deport anybody. Hey, women, and if you feel like today you're a different gender, then you are. We can't define what a woman is. We can't kick anybody out of any private spaces, even if they're minors there, undressing, things like that. Like, there became no line. There became no picture for the left. The left could draw 0 lines of propriety, and everybody said no. And even Donald Trump, for all his scandals, was willing to just push back and say, this is not what the government how the government shouldn't care about this. It shouldn't be involved in this. And it's such common sense. People are hungry for that, and they're willing to overlook the character assassination. Trump's character ultimately doesn't matter when his policies are so common sense.
Yep. So hey, I want to briefly touch base with something Chicken Strangler's been talking about. So Chicken, I think you're talking about Fox News. So Fox News individually has more individual viewers. So yeah, if you are referring to Joe Rogan as a right-leaning source, you're absolutely 100% incorrect about that. Joe Rogan is center left, right? He's center left. And the only reason that he was ever in Donald Trump's corner is because I don't think that Donald Trump is particularly right-leaning, right? Now, of course, a lot of people will call Trump right-leaning because he's a Republican, and that's how they designate right versus left. But in reality, right versus left usually means conservative versus liberal, like how much governmental involvement you want in the world. And Trump wants a lot of government involvement. He spends like crazy. He's a populist. He's not a conservative, right? And so Joe Rogan was down with that aspect of Trump. He was down with the fact that Trump wanted to give, like, for example, greater child care tax credits, and the fact that he wanted to like relieve, tax burdens on Social Security recipients. Just all those are liberal policies, right? And but if you're just talking about like mainstream media, like Fox News is the single largest watched media station. And so by themselves, they might be the biggest. But the problem is if you add up CNN and MSNBC and NPR and on and on and on, the left has far more coverage than Fox News can hope to manage, because they're the only big right-leaning station. The next biggest right-leaning station is like Redacted or something like that, who has like only a couple 100,000 followers. It's like it's nowhere close. So
and that's why the left has so often operated in a bubble. Jen Psaki, when she was Biden's press secretary for a long time, and she came out and she got hit with some very basic right-wing conservative counterpoints to stuff that she had never once ever heard, because she was in such a bubble of left groupthink, and her media sources, the media she read, her newspaper sources, the columnists she followed, everybody around her in her circle was all of the same opinion. She never heard any counter arguments for why maybe a certain policy that is so beloved on the left might not be so beloved, might not be so good, right? It just sort of blows her mind. She's like, what? And the left also has held people to an orthodoxy where any type of deviancy, even if you could say like, oh yeah, like Joe Rogan, who say he's for all these liberal policies, but he says, oh, Trump's right about the border or one thing. They want to disown him and call him a right-wing, just because of one issue or just because of one thing, right? And not listen to anything else he has to say. Right. If you are not in lockstep, if you have one difference of opinion with them, you're. And that's what happened. Like Elon Musk was left-wing. Jordan Peterson was considered himself on the left.
Matt Taibbi, like on and on and on.
He slightly pushed back and said, on something, and said, well, maybe this isn't right for the government to force this kind of speech. And everyone on the left lost their mind. How dare you question us? How dare you push back on us? This is a betrayal. You are right-wing, and pushed them into red pill, right? They get red pilled and they get awoken out of this bubble, and you can see the truth. Now, this is right. People that have been red pilled, people that have seen through the liberal media bubble, come to despise it. And that is also why the liberal media's attempts to character assassinate anyone on the right. Heck, they try to character assassinate Mitt freaking Romney, a Mormon Boy Scout, Eagle Scout, right? Who was super faithful to his wife. They were doing anything they could to character assassinate this guy, not because they cared about anything, but because they thought that the right would, abandon this. They tried to play up, his faithfulness to a church that has a problem that evangelicals have a problem with, right? Even though it has no relevance on his policies, his governance, anything like that. It was he was on the right, they were out to attack him. And right when Joe Biden says that Mitt Romney is going to put black people back in chains, right? And the media reports it and tries to get that message out that Mitt Romney is a danger to African Americans' liberty, right? And you're like, and nobody's calling him on that. Then it's like, all right, you are 100% spin for the
Right.
DNC. And if you're going to do that to Mitt Romney, right, of course you're going to do that to Trump. Why should we believe anything? You cried wolf.
Right.
You cried wolf so many times. We're not going to believe you. Let the wolf eat you and die. And maybe the next person that comes along and doesn't cry wolf, we'll give them a shot.
And it sucks because, and I will say that happens on both sides of the media spectrum all the time. They literally does. I won't say that I don't see it more from the left than the right, but that's because there is more of the left in the media than there is in the right. But when I watch Fox News, they do the same thing. It's a bunch of character assassination pieces, and that's just part of the political game. And it's a shame that it's gotten to that point. It's a shame that, like, we were talking about this last week, like, rewind 40, 50 years, and like the media was just trying to find the scandals. It didn't matter who it was. They just wanted to find news, right? And news that like people would like watch because scandals were always, they were scandalous, right? Like the people they would look out for scandals.
Yeah.
But nowadays, Fox News is basically straight up from the RNC, and MSNBC is straight up from the DNC. And like there's virtually no difference. They virtually basically get their talking points handed to them from their respective sides, and then they do not deviate from that almost at all. And I could go on any right-leaning station and find the exact same 5 things for the day, and I could go on the left-leaning stations and find the same 5 things for the day, and it just never changes. So that's truly unfortunate. But one thing though that has changed though is because we've cried wolf so many times, it's hard to pick apart the real scandals from the scandals are like, so I divide them, right? One thing, this is maybe, I don't know if everybody else does this, but I divide scandals into 2 different types: personal scandals and public, oriented scandals that will affect the public in some fashion, right? And so Trump has both, right? Trump has plenty of personal scandals that I know I should care more, but I just don't care very much. I really don't. Like when he paid off hush money to Stormy Daniels, I was like, all right, that sucks. He really should be better with his indiscretions, right? He shouldn't cheat on his wife. Melania, again, was a gorgeous young woman when they started this venture, right? And he should be, faithful regardless of the circumstances. But as far as his execution of the office of president, it really didn't matter much to me, right? But then, like, you would go to something like the Epstein situation, right? Again, it was a situation where it began as a personal scandal, and I didn't care. But then when I smelled
how he handled it, yeah,
right. But then when I smelled cover up, then it became a public thing, and it was kind of like that with Clinton too. Like, I didn't care that Clinton got a blowjob from Monica Lewinsky. But I did care that he was obstructing justice and trying to hide from his lawsuit with Paula Jones to do it, right? Like, that's what bothered me, and it was the public-facing side of it, right?
All right. So what do you know about Mario? Well, how do you feel about Cuomo, Governor Cuomo?
I don't like. I know he's smart, but I don't like him very much.
Well, right. So he got ran out of office because a member of his staff said he was sexually harassing. He was single, but he was sexually harassing members of his staff.
I remember that. Yeah.
This is during a Me Too movement. So he's out. So now he's back. He's running for mayor of New York.
Yeah.
Right. And so many people that denounced him are endorsing him because the alternative is a Islamic communist.
Right.
And they're like, Cuomo made some bad choices with maybe giving attractive young women on his staff shoulder rubs and making them feel awkward. But I don't want a Islamic communist
Right.
being the mayor of New York City. I
That's
would,
right.
please vote for Cuomo. These people are saying, like, the
Please.
character assassination, his personal failings as one of this, right? Like, this is somebody who can be a competent leader and can be, not corrupt. And can we please have him? And even though, like, he's a Democrat and a leftist, but a little more center left, certainly when compared to Mandami.
Right.
And so, yeah, people are like, those scandals don't matter anymore, right?
Right.
When it comes to, and I don't vote in the New York election, but if I did, if it came down to a vote between Cuomo and Mandami, who doesn't have any accusations of being inappropriate with women,
Right.
but his stated policies are so horrific.
Right.
Franklin Cuomo's scandals would not be the determining factor in my vote.
Right. Me either. And that's the other thing too, right? It's like, people would talk about how bad of a person Trump was, and I would be like, I agree. Like, but I agree. But meanwhile, like, Kamala Harris is talking about charging for capital gains before the fact. I'm like, that's going to bankrupt the nation. Like,
Yeah, the
how
wealth
do you
taxes
compare
and
that? Like, how do you can't, there is no comparison to that. It doesn't, Trump could sleep with a different woman every day of the year. And if it's compared to that, so something that will literally end business in the United States of America, there's no comparison. Like, that's just how I feel personally. And I'm fairly unbiased, right? I'm a conservative. I'm a fiscal conservative. For those of you out there, know, and I don't think like I've said it many times, Trump is not a very fiscally conservative guy, right? Like, it wasn't really between two. What does Tanya have to say here about this? She says,
well, Tanya says that somebody who covers up a private scandal will cover up a public one. Well, the media will not let Republicans cover up shiz, right?
Yeah, no, right,
You're a
right.
Republican, everything's going to come out. They will carry water to try to gloss over, right? Right. The moveon.org was like, hey, we know Clinton screwed up, but let's move on and stop talking about it. Please, media, stop talking about it. Right. So if the media is forced to talk about a left-wing scandal, they'll report it once and be like, we reported that. Let's stop talking about it. Right. If it's a right wing, they'll bring it up everyone. This is a subtle thing that the media does that maybe you don't know. It would be like if every time you mentioned Hillary Clinton, right? If it was Hillary Clinton who, the first thing you said was Hillary Clinton, not that she was Secretary of State or a senator from New York. It's Hillary Clinton who was engulfed in a real estate fraud scandal that resulted in the suicide of one of her close business advisors, recently visited New Jersey to open up a Harris Teeter or a Wegmans or something. Like, it's like a situation where it doesn't do it. They just throw in this tiny little hit piece, right? And they just sort of frame it like, hey, this person is known for this negative thing. And they do that. Well, for the left, they spin it. They spin for their guys and make it look easy, and they spin for the right. And so there are a lot of subtle things if you can see it. But yeah, essentially the media's job is to not let anybody from the left or the right get away with public and cover things up. That is the point of investigative journalism. Not to sit back and give us a list, do some journalism, figure out who was on that list, do that. Hold everybody accountable. Don't just be like, we're going to really dig into Trump and we're going to ignore for 4 years that Biden wasn't doing anything as president of the United States until after the fact. Jake Tapper was like, oh, suddenly, no, you should have been digging into this while he's in office. You certainly aren't going to wait until Trump's out of office in 2028 to report on all of Trump's stuff. You're doing it now. You didn't do that for Biden. And this is what people are like, look, do it for both. But yeah.
And Karine Jean-Pierre, right?
Trump is getting busted now. The fact that he's trying to hold up and say, let's not talk about Epstein anymore. Nobody in the media is letting him get away with that. Right. Well, they would if it was Biden.
Right, right, and yeah, and like consider that, right? Because a lot of times the right will try to mitigate things from the right hand side. Like you'll see Fox try to do it, they just don't succeed. I think part of it's because they just don't have a large enough market share of the media. But like, yeah, so Tanya, I would encourage you to think about the most recent scenario with just the last two presidents, right? Trump asked everyone to cover up Epstein, and what happened? It got bigger and bigger and bigger, right? When Biden asked everybody to cover up about his health, you had people like literally telling other reporters that all these are deep fakes, and that, like, him falling off of his bicycle was a deep fake, and that him tripping upstairs were deep fakes and stuff like that. And that no,
Gavin
Biden
Newsom is like Gavin Newsom is saying, I just came from a meeting behind the scenes, and he was dynamic, and he was in control, and he was just like, and even Jon Stewart is like, well, can we see it? Can you roll a camera? We have lots of cameras in this country. Can we see the dynamic Joe Biden? Right, not the zombie Joe Biden.
And so one of the things too is that with regard to Trump, right, and I'd like to draw that distinction, right? I'd like to be able to say this scandal is important because it's a public-facing scandal, and this scandal is not because it's just his dirty laundry, right? But unfortunately, we can't do that anymore. Unfortunately, in the media's eyes, every single scandal with Trump is like the biggest deal on earth. And you know what upsets me more about that is that so that's the next step, right? Is it disqualifying? Right? Is it actually disqualifying? And part of the problem is it depends a lot on the competition. I hate to say it, right? Like I've told many friends, and everybody who watches this channel regularly knows that I was not really a Trump fan, right? From the beginning, I was never really a Trump fan. Now I voted for him because the Democrats have literally fielded the worst possible candidates that I have ever seen from the left in my entire life, and maybe even the worst ever, maybe ever, right? Like if they were fielded, if it was Donald Trump and say like Stephen A. Smith, I would have voted for Stephen A. Smith. But that's not who we got. We get Kamala Harris, like literally barely able to say more than 6 lines by herself without a PR disaster. She stole half of her policies from Trump, and then the other half were nightmares. Like, this is what they feel.
She couldn't even explain that, but she couldn't explain any of them or defend any of them.
She couldn't tell us a single thing about it. And so then, of course, then it's like, they're like, well, Trump's a terrible person. I'm like, yeah, he is. And Kamala Harris isn't an angel either. But meanwhile, her policies are like going to end the nation. Now, one thing I want to bring up. This is an analogy, and some of you may not have the same like religious background that I do, but just bear with me because you'll at least understand. You'll at least know the name. In religious life, in Christianity, there's a name of a king named David, right? He was a very famous king of the Israelites, right? And King David was morally a reprehensible soul, right? He had a rough moral life. I mean, he was guilty of things of the like he saw a woman out in the garden who knew was married, captured her, had her husband sent off to the front lines to be killed on purpose so that he could sleep with this chick, right? Like, this is not like knowingly committed adultery while killing the woman's husband, right? This is not a good moral person if you were to just look at his history. Now, part of being a good moral person, though, incorporates repentance, right? And I've seen Trump do some things to repent, even though he's done some horrific things. He doesn't seem to stop his immoral behavior, which is part of repentance too, which is unfortunate. But with regard to how King David executed the office, he was one of the most successful kings of all time. And to this day, Israelites will revere him as one of the greatest kings of Israel because he expanded the realm. He was outrageously successful militarily. He taught good spiritual practices, which were after you screw up, repent, get back into the good graces of God. He managed he was one of the only kings in Israel to manage what I would call a successful turnover, which was to help the next king to succeed him, Solomon, to take over for him. And that's the kind of difference, right? So, like, if you were talking about like a politician, a random politician against King David, yes, I would see that King David has a past and doesn't live a perfect moral life, but perfection morally isn't actually the standard. The standard is, does he execute the office well? And can they repent, right? Can they get back in God's good graces? Hopefully, all of our politicians can do that, although I don't have much
Well,
faith in some of them.
David's a tragedy because
Yeah.
because he was very pure as a kid, right? The Lord looketh on the outward appearance, but the men looketh on the outward appearance. The Lord looketh on the heart. Like he was chosen to anointed because his heart was so good, and he defeated Goliath not through his might, but through his faith in God. And he threw that all away, for Bathsheba, and committed murder, and it's tainted his whole legacy. But God gets to judge; we don't get to, and it affected his ability to lead. It weakened his moral authority. When his daughter was raped, he could not justifiably condemn his son, and it led to a civil war, right? And losing all of his wives and many of his children getting killed, and him having to kill his son Absalom, who he loved, right? And he had war his whole life. But he recognized that. He didn't say that he was without fault. He tried to overcome it. And so he's seen as, there's him as the moral man and his weakness as the imperfect man, and him as the king. You can see this is a leader who was trying to do best for the country, right? And led the country to a place where they could live in peace, right? Solomon's reign was one of peace. And so I don't want to say Trump is a biblical figure, but anybody who rises, who needs to. So, all right. So, what I like him more too, I watched a movie this week, one of my favorite movies, and your flag in the back reminds me of his Patton. You've seen the movie Patton.
Great
right?
movie.
Patton, incredible. So, if you haven't seen Patton or know about General George Patton in the Second World War, know about him. This was a person who had a big ego and was flawed in a lot of ways. It was genius in a lot of ways, but was the right man to get an army, with modern tactics, get a tank army and move them and get things going, which what they needed. He was right man for the job, and even though his ego and had other personal failings, and he was attacked, he was followed mercilessly by the press, who were always out to find scandals, right, to dig up scandals in him. Because of his success, right? Because he was such a successful leader, and he was an eccentric. He was such a big ego. Everybody wanted to take that person down a peg, and I see that with Trump. That Trump has a big ego, and big ego people. It's sort of what you need to be a great field marshal, to command thousands of men and send them into danger, into war. You need this big ego. And it's a little bit of callousness to do that job right. And in the same way that George Patton and the commander in chief sort of need to have that quality. And he was respected in a way for it, but it led to, when he'd go too far, his detriment was, he would let all of his military or his genius gifts be wasted because of his public relations disasters, right? His favorability and things like this, and that he couldn't control his tongue. Things that ultimately he was vindicated, because at the end he was, he punched through the Battle of the Bulge and won these great victories. But people still were looking to just set him aside because of his strong personality, because of his big ego. And I think Donald Trump too, he's the man we need to lead this country right now, especially considering the alternatives. We need someone with a big ego that can stand up to all of the character assassination, everybody that's trying to call him racist, things like that, and say, none of that matters to me. I'm just going to execute my office. There's so many ways that the left and others will try to manipulate and shame people. You see it in Great Britain right now. Everybody in the Conservative Party is so terrified of being called racist that they get cowed from doing common sense things that are good for Britain, and then the country just implodes until you have to have a major correction, right? And they're going to need a Trump-like leader, somebody that can be strong and withstand that kind of abuse.
Yep. And you know what? So one thing that I wanted to mention too is that Tanya's talking about this scandal with Epstein is about children, right? And I don't want anybody to come away from this thing thinking that I don't think that Epstein is a big deal, right?
Yeah.
And it is a big deal. But understand that the Epstein scandal is provably Epstein's scandal. It's not provably Trump's scandal, right? And one thing that I want to make sure that everybody understands is that I have a natural abhorrence. I do not like accusing people of something that I can't prove, right? And this is just something that goes back to the foundations of the American legal system, right? People here are innocent until proven guilty, right? People here, what was Blackstone's comment? It's like better to let 10 innocent men go or guilty people go free than one innocent person rot in prison or something along those lines. And that's the concept of the legal system here in America. It's important to make sure that we are innocent until proven guilty, right? And I get that some people out there may have intuitions about this sort of thing, but I urge you to remember, with regard to Epstein in particular, that this is a situation where Epstein was arrested in 2018. His, suicide, quote unquote, suicide took place in 2019. This all went down during Biden's reign with Biden's Department of Justice, where they were literally fishing for any possible thread that they could pull to try to make Trump look guilty of anything. And they came up with hundreds of BS arguments and BS scandals. You think they would have missed this one? They would not miss Epstein. If they could put Epstein on Trump, they would put Epstein on Trump. I promise you. The fact is that
it would be. I think a lot of the Epstein scandal is it's unsatisfying that his suicide. Right? If he had been held accountable and thrown in jail, and his accusers, and we've been able to have a full trial, right? Then we can feel like justice was done. We were robbed of that because he either committed suicide or gross incompetence by whoever was responsible for his detention. Yeah. But because he's dead, we can't go after the fact and make him not dead just to help give us closure. There's always going to be a lack of closure because of that.
There's another element to this too that people seem to overlook, right? Well, although we haven't found a whole bunch of people to hold accountable for Epstein, which upsets me, right? I do think that we should have at least some actionable intelligence on some of the perpetrators, but we have to remember that we do still have lots and lots and lots of victims, right? And you have to understand that Trump is one of the most memorable, most public-facing, most vetted people ever to live in the history of mankind. Now, if you've got all these victims and none of them are saying Trump did this, what do they just not recognize him? No, he didn't. None of them are saying Trump did this because Trump wasn't personally involved in his pedophilia ring. I mean, I'm sorry. The only reason for them all to start pointing the finger at a bunch of people other than Trump is that he wasn't involved, or that maybe he's threatening all 1,000 of these people. That's just very unlikely. And if you look at the history of it's funny because people have one of Trump's the accusations that have been levied at Trump. One of the many accusations is that he runs things like a mob boss, and that he's da 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 da, and he can muscle people into submission and stuff like that. The truth is, Trump threatens people all the time, with their political careers, but that's their political careers. I have yet to see a personal threat turn into something where, and people have, tried, people have said, that Trump is a bad man, but I haven't even seen people who he's had personal scandals with, like Stormy Daniels, E. Jean Carroll. None of them have said that Trump is privately threatened them, right? None of them. They've said that he's belittled them and that he's counter countered their accusations with accusations of his own. But that's it. Like, none of them have gone into trial saying, "Oh, and then he threatened to kill me if I didn't da 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 da." That's just not on one of that's just not one of the things that Trump stands guilty of. I'm sorry. It's just not one of his patterns. It's not one of the things that people say about him. He's guilty of so much. This is the other thing that I got to get out there. Trump is guilty of so much stuff that we don't have to make up garbage.
Yeah.
He's guilty
That's
of
true.
so much stuff that we don't have to make up crap to put on him. He's got plenty already. Like, we
Yeah, the
don't need to make
dossier,
it.
yeah, you don't need to make it. The making up stuff only undermines their credibility and makes it
Exactly.
so, right? You cry wolf so much times that when there's a real problem, you no longer have the credibility or trust for us to act on it. And he's Teflon Man now.
Teflon Don.
The left needs to accept that he's Teflon Man. Nothing is going to stick,
Right.
right? So stop. They need to just sort of give up and attack his policies, whether or not they're good or bad, and stop the character assassination. I think Trump has by winning his second term, he's proved none of this character assassination coming from the left. Nobody's buying it. It's not working. It's not sticking.
In fact, it's the opposite. And I think you would think that the left would have seen it by now. Like, for example, I'll give you as a quick story. Right before Trump won the primary, it was looking like DeSantis was in a pretty good spot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, everybody was thinking that maybe DeSantis was going to overcome Trump for the primaries. And by the way, DeSantis was my pick at the time, right? That's who I wanted to win the primaries for the Republican Party. Now, but what happened was they started levying scandal after scandal after scandal at Trump's head, and then they indicted him. And what happened? His popularity soared through the roof. And I'm like, you would think by now that they would realize that Trump, out of all, he's got a million different weaknesses, many different strengths too. Everybody does. One of his key strengths as a politician is that nobody that I've ever seen in my life has been able to turn bad press into political capital faster and harder than Trump does. And what's amazing to me is after he does it, he turns this bad press into political capital, and then they throw more bad press at him. And I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You are literally playing right into his hands, and they do it over and over and over again.
They fall for all of his little baiting. They take all of his jokes super seriously. They cannot understand Trump because their dislike for him is such a it's what we talk about. It's emotion and logic. They're not thinking with their neocortex. They're thinking with their limbic emotional center, and so that's not strategy. And they don't even care about the truth. They've stopped caring about the truth, and that's why just like with Francois Hollande, when you start reporting on somebody's personal failings, a mistress, and it makes them more likable, makes their favorability go up. The media has lost the power to change people's opinion about this person for the negative. Yep. Anytime you come out, if the media just came out and said, we hate Donald Trump, and people were like, I like him even more. This is a guy that's going to stand up to the elites and the media. He reserves his strongest vitriol, his meanest sort of stuff, not for common people like us, but for the elites, for the medias, for the people that think that they're above him.
Yep. Now
my dog agrees.
Oh yeah. Winter, there you go. Winter, tell them all about it. So one thing that I am kind of curious to hear what the audience thinks. What if you had to pick some items that you think are disqualifying, like for a politician, like what would they be? I know that my personal answer to this is anything that directly subverts, and it has to be directly subverts the democratic process, right? So one of the things that I think might be a disqualifier, although it's, Obama is now long out of his political, his voting, people, anything that would require suffrage, anything that would require him getting voted into office, he's no longer going to be president, but he still kind of hangs around as a political figure. But now the fact that it's coming to light that Obama specifically and deliberately tried to manufacture Russiagate, the fact that Obama specifically and deliberately tried to like basically feed the flames of that, and to try to subvert Trump in every way that he could, and to kill the what was it, the investigation into, you know, Clinton and a bunch of other stuff. It was like, you know, that makes me feel kind of icky inside. Like, I don't know that I could ever vote for somebody that saw the reports, saw that this was, you know, this was the intelligence that we had, and he's like, no, you kill this investigation on Hillary and find me more dirt on this guy. That's like, that's really putting your thumbs on the scale. And he had the power and prestige to do it. And that bothers me. I would never vote for somebody like that in a million years.
Yeah, and because it's unbelievably inappropriate for the power we are trusted. We trust the government we entrust them with violence. Yeah. You can legitimately enact violence. You can legitimately do all these things. We're giving them all this power for them to wield it so irresponsibly, so yeah, just recklessly fraud, right? It undermines our whole ability to trust. Now, thankfully, in America, our Constitution is set up to limit the government, right? Our founding fathers knew that we should distrust government, that there would be people like that. And so it's hard to get stuff done. There have to be checks and balances. We can expose it. And with elections, hopefully, you know, people can see something that when somebody does a disqualifying act like that, an abuse of power. And I think that's why a lot of people are turning away from the Democratic Party, because their use of power has been inappropriate. They're not buying their justifications, right? One of the big things that's come out this week as well, we can maybe talk about it next time, is about this DNC autopsy, right? Where they're trying to diagnose why people turned away, especially, you know, minorities in bigger numbers turning away from their from the DNC to vote for Trump. But I think this is all part of it. The how likable it is. How much do we trust them to run the government and hold the power of violence we entrust in the government responsible, or are they just going to lie and make up stuff and spin and propagandize like it's, you know, some horror George Orwell book, right?
Yeah, and so Charlie says release the list and free us all from the ones dirtying the water. I agree there. I think that it's forthcoming. I know that they're going to go interview Maxwell, so they're going to take a look see if they can find something for us. I'm guessing that's a consolation prize. That's what it feels like to me a little bit, because I don't think that we're going to get the precise information that we're looking for. What we really want is the magical list that probably doesn't exist, right? Like we talked about this last week. It's not like a wedding book guest list. It's not like people signed in and said, this is my name, this is the date, this is the crime of pedophilia that I'm going to perform today. That's not the kind of thing that they have. What they have is outrageous numbers of videos. But I really do hope that they can do something actionable with it. I really do. And I'm hoping that this interview with Maxwell will turn up something. So that's my goal. Anyway, guys, that's all we really had for you today. Christian, you got any words to wrap up?
Well, I mean, it would be nice if we could get back to a place where our politicians are such men of honor that a slight personal failing becomes disqualifying.
Yeah, right.
We're not there, right? I think, right, South Park kind of in their parody said that our choices right now for leaders are between, somebody bad and somebody less bad. And the left has been willing to take a corrupt buffoon, as long as he was their corrupt buffoon, but not the right's corrupt buffoon, right? And so if we get back where both of our choices are good choices, that would be and what really mattered was this guy had an affair on his wife. That's the determining factor. Would be worlds away. Right now, right? I'm not happy that I have to discount all this stuff, but there's not really an alternative, and it's what matters. And the media, if they can rebuild our trust, where when they say that something is a major scandal, we'll trust them. But it's not 2025. It's going to
Yeah.
take a lot of hard work to get us there.
Yeah, if we ever make it. I wish that, the sad truth of the matter is 90% of the people, when they go to the polls, all that they're looking for is a little D or the R next to the name. And about 70% of them don't even know the names. They just know the D and the R, right? Like they just roll up in there and they're like, "Ooh, Democrat," and sign here. And that's it's a shame that that's how it is. I wish that we did make political decisions based on not only the policies but the character of the people. I would love to have once, like Christian said, I'd love to have once a choice between a person with great policies and another person with great policies but just a minor indiscretion in their background. Right? Like, God, that would be fantastic.
Right.
But unfortunately,
and that would be if Elon Musk wants to make his party real, give us a real candidate.
yeah, right. And not Elon Musk, by the way. He needs to run his companies, and not that I don't appreciate some of the things he's done, but anyway, really, that's all we really have for you this week. And we'd love to see you next week, guys. For those of you who are just tuning in, please like, share, and subscribe. Hacker wanted me to talk about Israel a little bit. I don't mind staying on a little bit longer and talking about Israel. Christian, you're welcome to stay too if you want, and we can chat about Israel.
What is his take on Israel? I mean, that's a really broad topic. Is it that Israel is continuing the war in Gaza?
Yeah. So Hacker said this probably sums up his take, and he says, "End Zionism by." I don't know if he's even still here. I will say this now. Zionism means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I think that it's really important to separate the different parts. Just like we would in a politician, right? We'd separate their private indiscretions from their public indiscretions. Same thing for Zionism. Zionism's got a lot of like public-facing policies and procedures, things that happen in their history that I think are perfectly fine, and I think they've got a lot of private things that happen in their history that are probably not great, right? And like it's just like that in Gaza, right? You could take the governmental action in Gaza, and I think it's largely warranted. That doesn't mean that there aren't private situations, private IDF forces that have done some abysmal things in Gaza, and that may be the case. And the same thing goes in reverse, of course, as well. There's been plenty of private things that the Gazans have done, and plenty of things that the government of Hamas has done, or whatever you would call them. I don't know if you call them a government or not, that they've done that are horrific, right? And so it's important to separate those two things out. So if your objection is to something that a private person did because he was being an idiot while in the IDF, that's not to me the same thing as what the IDF does as a whole. So
I'd like to liken this to American history. One of the most famous historical figures in America, a man by the name of William Tecumseh Sherman.
Yes.
Right? You know Sherman. What is in your opinion on Sherman's military campaign? I think will reflect a lot of how you feel about Israel.
True.
Right. So he was fighting to end slavery, right? Fighting against the rebels. And he, as a general, what he understood is that he was going to take this fight not just to the soldiers of the South, but to the machinery, the war-making capabilities, i.e. the supply lines, and the citizens, and make war so horrific, war is hell, that is his quote, that they would sue for peace. And he marched through, burned Atlanta, marched to Savannah, right? And his march to the sea, a 10-mile swath of destruction, up through South Carolina, destroying everything as he chased Johnson. And then, came to Durham. Durham is where he actually accepted the surrender of Johnston's army, or the effective end of the Civil War. After Lee surrendered in Virginia, his terms were very generous, right? And that was his whole thing. If you want to end this war, your mechanism to do that is to surrender. Appeal to your leaders and surrender. If Hamas, but that war is hell. Hamas declared war on Israel. Israel says, okay, if you declare war, we will give you war. And the way that you can end this war is the way that all wars are ended, by surrendering. Hamas has not surrendered, so war continues to be hell on them. And nothing will change in Gaza until they surrender. Right? Hamas is choosing to continue this war. They're asking, they're pleading, please don't prosecute this war in the way that wars must be prosecuted. And as hell. It was the only way Sherman saw to actually end the war, the Civil War, which needed to end. Otherwise, it's a morass forever, right? And I think that's a lesson that Israel has learned, right?
Yep.
And the Hamas needs to learn, as the South did. You've got to, if you want the hell to end, you've got to surrender. Otherwise, you declared war. The South declared war. They fired on Fort Sumter. They started it off, right?
Now,
Hamas started it off.
Let me play devil's advocate for a minute. Now,
sure.
Obviously, we've changed the way we fight wars a lot over the last, 100 years.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, since World War II, there seems to be this huge taboo of like actually ending a war, right? Like back in the day, we knew that ending meant either extermination or beat into submission so badly that they would understand that extermination is forthcoming, and they're like, okay, right? But we can't.
Germany and Japan were humbled superpowers. Italy too.
Right. And so, I don't. Maybe that part of this is because the Middle East just doesn't think like the rest of the world does, but part of it is we don't seem to like allowing that anymore on the world stage. So the question is it still the best play to push someone into surrender, or is there like a game to be played on the world stage where instead of like here's a pure hypothetical, right? So October 7th happens and it's horrible, right? And obviously any normal sane person would think, all right, we have to make sure that this shit never happens again, right? Any sane person would think this. But what if, hypothetically, Israel's like, okay, instead of us retaliating, we're going to appeal to UN. We're going to make it their responsibility to make sure that this never happens again. Just hypothetically, what do you think would happen? I mean, how do you feel that would play out? Because then if any bad press comes of it, if it turns into woe is me, Gaza is so poor and oppressed, and Israel's big bad wolf and meanie and stuff like that, then it's all on the UN and not on Israel, right?
Well, the UN would, for the UN to do it, Israel would have to lose their sovereignty. They would come in and effectively take over Israel.
Yeah.
Because in such small spaces, they would take over and remove Israel's ability to defend themselves.
That'd be wildly unpopular,
which is essentially what Hamas wants.
Yeah.
Right? And that Israel would cease to be a Jewish state. They'd be a UN state. A UN state. Right? Hamas's opposition to Israel is that it's a Hebrew state. Right? It is a tribal thing that we don't understand. It's a religious thing that we don't understand. Now, look, so I think the fact that whether or not you agree, Zionism is whether or not Israel has a right to exist is an immaterial argument. It doesn't matter to have that argument anymore. That's navel gazing, right? That's a 20th century argument.
Yeah, not even
they're not going anywhere.
Not even the second half.
Whether Israel has any right to exist or whether Zionism, should happen, doesn't matter. Zionism is here. They're strong enough. They have the power. Israel is a legitimate nation. They're recognized. They want to live in peace. They're not going anywhere. Accept that. It's that they want to delude themselves into thinking that this is not a settled question. Israel is a settled question. The Saudis believe that Israel is a settled question, right?
So I want to make sure Charlie knows this because I'm not sure he does. Israel is a multi-religion state, right? Like, yes, it's primarily controlled by like Jews have the majority of powers.
They call themselves, they identify themselves as a Jewish state, but they have freedom of religion there too.
Yeah, they have freedom of religion there. There's over 2 million. There's 2 million Arab Muslims there. There's like Christians. There's people of all. Oh, okay. I didn't know who you were talking to, but yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that. One of the classic games that's played in this Zionism debate, right, is like they use words like genocide and stuff, and I'm like, if they wanted to kill Arab Muslims, there's a whole lot of them in their own state they could start with. They don't seem to want to do that, right? This is as a matter of fact, I was having a conversation with somebody, one of my friends the other day, and we were talking about that, and he's like, well, that was the first thing I brought up. I was like, don't you think that Israel has the ability to wipe out Gaza if they wanted to? They have a lot of ordnance in Israel. Like just so people understand this, Israel tomorrow could turn Gaza into a Gulf. And it would be like Gulf Gaza. That'd be it. They don't. And there's a reason that they don't. Because they don't want to. They can, but they don't. Right? So that's simple enough. One of the things that people get lost on is they see, like 30,000, 40,000 in it. Maybe even 50,000 deaths already, and that's horrific. Like the truth is that war is terrible. It really is. War is a horrible thing, and I never want to see it personally in my lifetime. Any more so than I already have in my limited experience in the military. And I never was in an active war zone. I was stationed overseas, but I never had to. God willing, I never had to fight anything. Personally. But it's terrible. Like you never want to see a war. But one of the things that I note though is that like the atrocities that people point to that Israel has committed have all been committed as a part of prosecuting a war. And that sucks, but it's a war. It's not like they're going to walk over to Gaza and tell jokes until they give up. They're not going to walk over to Gaza and pet their head softly until they give up. They have to fight. That's just the only way that you do it.
Well, Gaza chose that the way to settle, they wanted to settle their disagreements with Israel was through warfare, through violence. Right? They had to accept that Israel's better at violence than they are.
So
and that's what we're seeing. If they don't like that Israel is more better at violence than they are, just like the South had to realize that the North could inflict more violence upon them than they could inflict upon the North. Their way to end the Civil War was through surrender.
So Charlie, I don't know what you mean by when you say you don't have the ability. They don't have the ability because they know their target if they get caught with what? Israel has already done significant damage to Gaza and been caught. I mean, it's not like it's a secret, right? This is not a secret from anyone.
They've declared war. This is a formal declaration of war, right? Hamas has formally declared war against Israel. They're in a state of war. Hamas doesn't want Israel to exist at all. And so if Israel accepts that they don't want Gaza to exist at all, which would be fair, they're just matching their terms.
So,
right?
And again, so when you say, Charlie, when you say that Israel wants the Gazans' land, I don't think so. One thing, so there's a couple of facts to understand with regard to God. Now, I might agree that Israel wants some of the West Bank, maybe, right? Like I might buy that argument. But you got to understand that Israel has already had occupation in Gaza and given it up freely. Like they had people there and forcibly removed all of their own people back in I think it was 2005. Like ripped them out. Like these are families, Israeli families living in Gaza, and they're like they sent the IDF in. Is like y'all get out and leave and let them have their own state. And then of course. It was almost immediately taken over by Hamas, who then went and
they were elected. They were elected.
Yeah,
they chose them all.
And then they went and Hamas went in and burned all of the infrastructure. Israel had built like great houses, a church, a local school, like great facilities, And Hamas went in and is like, no, we don't want anything from Israel. Burn it all. Right? So, like, if Israel wanted that land, all they had to do was just keep it and take it. Israel could take that land at any point in time. Israel had the entire Sinai Peninsula and gave it back to Egypt. Israel had most of the West Bank before and gave it back to Jordan at the time. Israel's had given back more land than most nations have ever had, like, conquered. Like, they keep on giving this land. I don't even know why.
Yeah.
Like,
They should have held on to Sinai.
They should have. Like, strategically, it would have been more in their interest to just hold on to that land, but they gave it back as like part of a peace deal. But you know what? It worked, because now negotiations between Egypt and Israel are kind of sort of relatively amicable. And you note the between Gaza and Egypt now, Egypt won't take in any Gazans because they're just too much trouble.
Egypt thinks Israel is more legit than Gaza as a Gaza. Everybody in Gaza needs to move to South Sudan or Syria. That's it. Those are your choices.
That's probably smart.
South Sudan or Syria.
Or assimilate into Israel. But here's the thing, they're never going to do that, of course, right? Now, and people ask me a lot of times, like, do I want a two-state solution or do I want a one-state solution? Honestly, I truly believe this. I truly believe that a one-state solution would be a superior situation. But that having been said, I wouldn't mind a two-state solution. I wouldn't care if Hamas and the PLO are not in power. If you can take all the terrorist action out of it, right? And they elect a real government who actually is interested, who is actually interested in protecting their own people and not like hiding amongst them to try to like harm others, then great, fine. I would have no problem with that. I just want them to be, at peace. I want them to re-engage in commerce with the rest of the world like normal people. I don't know. Maybe I'm old fashioned. Maybe this just doesn't.
No. It's common sense. That's what we're all about here. And we've got to approach Israel with common sense. Not like if we do something super bizarre, that's going to be the signal. The only way through, the only thing that Arabs respect is strength. And Israel has to win this and settle the relationship through Hamas as one of power and strength. And they must be a humbled people, or they'll never have peace. Anyway, I got to go. Love you guys.
Catch you later. Yeah, I'll hang up for a few more minutes if you guys want to keep on firing questions. I don't mind. So yeah, Charlie. So just so you understand, like there have been no fewer than, I believe, 7 peace deals between Israel and surrounding Palestinian states of some sort, and in each and every one of them, the Palestinians break the ceasefire at some point. With the exception of once, and that was because intelligence reports were very clear about the Palestinians being about to break the cease deal, and so Israel struck in advance. They did a preemptive strike, but it was obvious that they were mounting forces and that they were going to come in. But so like in this most recent one, for example, there've been the ceasefire has been struck several times, and in each and every case, Hamas continues to fire in rockets into Israel proper. And so it's like, what are you supposed to do? I mean, are you at ceasefire while somebody's still firing rockets at you? I don't think that counts. Maybe now in Hamas's defense, the rockets don't always hit, right? Because a lot of times Israel's able to deflect them. And we shot a rocket, but it didn't hit anybody. But I don't think that's, I mean, if I'm in a fight with somebody man to man and somebody's still swinging, somebody's still throwing punches, I'm not at peace with that person, right? I'm going to still continue to defend myself until that person stops throwing punches. So that's just how I feel about it. I mean, I'm not saying that, and I want to be clear, I'm not saying that Israel's perfect. They darn sure I'm not, right? Like they've made plenty of errors. They've made plenty of just the other day, I think Israel fired a ballistic and it either missed or it hit or shrapnel, like it blew up and shrapnel hit a church, which, that's terrible. That sucks. And that's basically due to their, I can't tell which mistake they made. They either made the mistake of like their munitions got had a malfunction, or that they thought they were targeting something that they weren't. Well, either way, that's a mistake, right? So they screw up all the time. But again, and this is the biggest thing that you and I were talking about the other day. There's the hugest difference is in intent, right? So whereas Israel at least intends to accomplish a different goal, a peaceful goal. Their goal is to recover the people that they have that Gaza has as hostage, and to create a system where they can't be attacked. Whereas Hamas's goal is to wipe out Israel from the river to the sea, and they've stated openly and blatantly such many times. So, and when you say their actions don't reflect that, which actions are you talking about? Yeah, well, Captain Blackbird, I would love to show you a slideshow. We're working on. I have to get a different type of software so that I can see. I wish I was able to do that right now. The only way that I know to run a live stream is off of my phone, and to have this like dual vertical screen, and that's the only way I can get Christian and myself on there. But I think that there's software that I can get that I'm working on, and if I get the software, then I can do that. I can superimpose screen shares and things like that. I can run it off of my computer. I can do a bunch of things. So I'm working on that. Just bear with me as I try to get there. But yeah, Charlie, tell me what actions individually you think that Israel have taken that don't reflect their desire for a peaceful outcome. So let's see. Freedom says if the hostages are deceased, you can't swap them. That's very true. And, they may be. The hostages may already have been killed. And maybe that's why Hamas is still playing this game where they just won't release them. I mean, but even so, I suspect that if Hamas had a bunch of people that they had already tortured and killed or something like that, that they could just turn them over and say, look, we're sorry. These are the horrors of war, but it wasn't our fault. Somebody under our supervision went and got rambunctious or something like that. And probably Israel would still end the conflict if they were willing to release the bodies and give everything over and surrender, right? That would probably still end the conflict. Because again, Israel doesn't want to continue wasting money. They don't want Gazan land for themselves. Again, like I said, they might want the West Bank, and Israel. One of the things that Israel is doing that I think is wrong is Israel is playing this game with real estate in the West Bank. They're doing this thing where they are kind of like building neighborhoods closer and closer and closer to, and they claim that that the line is in a different place. Israel thinks that the line is a different spot, and the West Banks would claim that that the line is further in and that Israel's already encroached upon it. But that's the game that they're playing in the West Bank. But they're not doing that in Gaza, right? In Gaza, they don't want that land. That land is largely desertous and not very developed. And why would they want it? They wouldn't want it back, So let's see. Captain Blackbird says, "Be honest with people and tell where the river to the sea." So where the river to the sea means is they want that. This is from the Intifada, I believe, and that's where they want full ownership, right? So they want the Palestinians want ownership from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. They want zero Jewish state, right? And that's stated clearly in their charter too. They want death to the Jews, death to America. It's all over the place. So and this is the difference in intent, right? As I've said many times, tomorrow, if Israel laid down their arms, there would be no more Israel. But if Gaza lays down their arms, Gaza would still exist and there would be no more war, right? And so that's the big difference between the two of them. All right, so let's see. Charlie, did you ever get back to me on the actions that you think Israel is taking that don't reflect their desire for peace? I said that you said that their actions don't reflect that. I didn't see anything after that. I might have been missing let's see. I might have been missing one of your texts. Maybe I'm missing it. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, So with regard to humanitarian aid, for example, right? This is one of the games that that is being played here, and this is why the fog of war is no easy thing to get through. So one thing that happens is that obviously there's two sides to every story, just like there is here in America, right? Between the Republicans and the Democrats. Here it's between the Israelites and Hamas, right? And so the Israelites tell one story, Hamas tells another. The UN tries to mitigate, but to a large part, the UN is essentially sympathetic to whoever is to the weaker party, right? And this happens a lot, by the way, in American politics too, where people assume that to be weaker means to be right, right? To be oppressed means to be correct. And that's not the way the world works. You're right, independent of whether you're weak or strong, right? You're correct whether or not you're weak or strong. You're moral whether or not you're weak or strong. And then if you're strong, it amplifies how right or wrong you are. So that's how the real world works. Now, the problem is the UN doesn't see things that way. And a lot of people, with respect, a lot of people on the left don't see things that way. So they see a weaker group and they assume that that group is righteous, but it's unfortunately not the case. Now, what happens is the story from the left and from Hamas is that the Israelites are thwarting humanitarian aid. But I think if you do enough digging, you'll find that the real story is that the Israelites are facilitating humanitarian aid. They just want to be the ones to control it, because what they don't want is for the weakness in humanitarian aid to be exploited, because it has been several times already, right? So the Israelites, and there was a study that was done not too long ago. There's a study that was done not too long ago that shows that the Israelites, Israel is actually facilitated bringing in over 3,000 calories of food per person per day. I'm going to say that again. They've brought in over 3,000 calories of food per person per day. That is enough to feed anyone. Anyone, right? No one is going to starve with the amount of food that Israel has facilitated bringing in. Charlie, I'm still not seeing everything. I'm seeing a couple of things that you write. So I see. All right, just so you see what I'm seeing. I see you say, "Oh, gotcha," and then the next thing I see you said, "Yeah, scroll up," and I did, and I couldn't find anything. Then you said humanitarian aid. Then you said, "Let me retype," and then the next thing I see after "let me retype" is you're still not reading. Yeah, it might have a cat. I don't know. I actually don't know what the limit of characters is for a statement. But yeah, so I just want to let you know that they are processing humanitarian aid. They just want to control it. They want to make sure that they're the one. And one of the reasons that they want to control it too, by the way, is that in the beginning, when Israel was allowing humanitarian aid to flow freely, what was happening was Hamas would steal from the humanitarian aid zones and then resell it to their people. So, right, again, here we go. Again, booby trap bullets. This is a great example. Many of those booby traps, Charlie, are from Hamas, because the last person to want Gazans to receive humanitarian aid is Hamas. They're the ones that want to take that food for themselves and sell it back to their people, because that's what they've been doing from the beginning of the conflict. They're the ones that don't want it. Think about it. Out of all the people, if you're Israel and you're running a humanitarian aid site, who do you think doesn't want Israel to run a humanitarian aid site? It's not Israel. It's Hamas. Hamas doesn't want them to run a humanitarian aid site. Because as a matter of fact, Israel's done actually a remarkably good job, although everyone's going to call it ethnic cleansing. I would say that they've done a remarkably good job of moving many of the Gazans out of the way of the war zone so that they can produce this humanitarian aid in a controlled fashion. See, what was happening before is they would just drop the food off, and Hamas would take it and then sell it back to their own people and buy rockets and then fire them back at Israel. So, this is a catch-22. Now, on the downside of that, it is probably the technical version of the technical definition of ethnic cleansing, because you had to move a large group of people, all of the same relative ethnicity. But I think that intent counts, right? If you're doing it to save them, if you're doing it to feed them, it's a much better reason than to do it because you just don't want them to live there. And it's not like they're moving them out of the way completely so that they can take over the land, although that might be a smart move strategically. They're doing it because they need to control the humanitarian aid sites. Now, I won't deny that it is, of course, always possible that rogue agents might be doing crazy stuff, right? And I don't know, this is the problem when you look at the fog of war is you can see somebody saying something like, "Oh, it's booby trapped, bullets were found." Well, what does that mean? Anybody can fire a bullet, right? Was that IDF forces? Was that Hamas? Was that anybody? It could be anybody, and you don't know, right? Well, and here's another game, by the way, that's being played. This is another game that's being played in the media, which is something that Charlie just said. Said that they talk about the number of kids, right? The number of children. One thing that I need everyone to understand is that Hamas recruits by age of 11 and 12. That's they take in combatants at 12 and 13. Like by 13, you're a full scale trained combatant in the Hamas forces. I mean, think about it. They don't have that many people to choose from. They have to take kids and teenagers, right? So then Israel ends up killing, unfortunately, enemy combatants in the course of a war, and many of them are in fact children, right? And so what'll happen is then somebody will go back and do a PR hit on it, and they'll say, "Hey, they killed some kids." I'm like, "Yeah, these kids had AK-47s and we're firing them at us. What do you want us to do?" Like that's one of the problems. It's been a problem in third world countries everywhere, like Somalia and Syria and stuff like that. They recruit very, very young. As a matter of fact, a lot of like these dictators will take these. Actually, it's more than I think it's more than that, Charlie. But again, you're talking about indirect fire, right? Because think about it. When you get groups, wait, 710. All right, you're giving me a lot of different numbers, but I think it's actually 15,000 18 or under have died, something like that. 15,000 18 or under have died. But again, you're talking about 15. That you're talking about many of them are enemy combatants. Many of them are Hamas, and yeah, some of them are not. Some of them are civilians, and that's the horrors of war. And war sucks. It really does. I cannot tell you how traumatic. Like literally, nobody comes out on the other side of war without PTSD. Basically, like if you've seen war firsthand, you're almost always going to have PTSD. It is a gut-wrenching, heart-rending situation. I never want to experience that firsthand. So, all right, again, it's not a genocide, and I want to. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I want to be clear about what a genocide is definitionally. A genocide is the intentional targeting of a race for the purposes of killing that race, right? Here's the thing. Israel is targeting Gazans, but they're not targeting them because they're Gazan. They're targeting them because they're fighting a war with Hamas, right? And that's the difference. That's a complete difference between what makes a genocide and what doesn't make it. Like, for example, we fought Germany in World War II. Did we commit a German genocide? No, because we were fighting a war with them. Did we commit a Japanese genocide? No, because we were in a war with them. It only counts as a genocide if you are killing them because they are German or Japanese or Gazan or Israeli. Now, I will say this the other way around. Very often, like for example, the October 7th attack, very often the Palestinian attacks on the Israeli group are genocidal. Very often they are targeting them because they're Jews, not because they're at war with them or anything like that. Did we shoot children in World War II? Absolutely. Charlie, we forget the fact that we dropped 2 atomic bombs on largely civilian areas, which I think was terrible. Forget that fact. There was the Dresden firebombing. Oh yeah, Charlie, we killed thousands and thousands of kids. maybe even hundreds of thousands. We killed like so many kids that it would make you go blind. That's the horrors of war. And I hate it. War's terrible, right? It's terrible. But you need to understand that just because war is terrible doesn't mean it doesn't need to be fought sometimes, right? And I'm not saying that this is one of those times. I don't know. I truly don't. But here's the challenge that I would present to you. If you're Israel and someone comes into your crib and starts stealing your family, starts taking your people, and starts raping your people, and starts cutting them up, and starts taking them hostage, what do you do? Right? Because I can't think of anything. I can't think of a good answer to that question. Any way you do it, it's going to come out negative. Yeah, Charlie, I'm telling you, under 5 years old. I get. Oh, you want it? We can look it up right now. I can type it in here. How many children under 5? I can't type right now. Under 5 died in World War II. Let's take a look. Difficult to estimate, but children under 5, World War II, estimates suggest 1.5 million children, mostly Jewish, perished due to Nazi action. All right, but like, let's see, how many did we kill? Well, it's roughly it looks like 5 to 7,000 or something like that of Gypsy heritage. I could go on and on. You know, there's far too many to count at that point. Like we killed tons and tons in every war. Unfortunately, the true one of the life's true unfortunate natures is that war is horrible and that kids die when war happens, which is by the way, one of the best reasons not to ever have a war, right? If we could just resolve this peacefully, it would be great. And once again, Charlie, I tell you, the easiest way to bring peace to the Middle East conflict right now is for Gaza to surrender. All they need to do is to surrender and give back all of the hostages, and I guarantee you that ceasefire could be reached. I guarantee you. And stop firing rockets, right? Like they really need to just stop fighting. Right? That's what brings peace. And it sucks that that's the case. But one of the things that we've lost sight of too is that, and this is a truly unfortunate thing too, because once again, might doesn't make right. But there is a point in time where you have to be realistic, right? For example, Israel's just vastly stronger than Gaza, right? So even if there was a situation where where the dispute was perhaps neutral, for example. I can't think of a neutral situation at the moment, but even if the dispute was neutral and they just had like a misunderstanding over land or something like that, and they got into a fight, right? Unfortunately, one of them is going to win, right? And at that point, you just have to understand that, if you're about to lose, like I got in my share of fights when I was younger, right? And I'm a skilled combatant for my size and weight, but I'm not a very big guy, right? So I got in fights sometimes with bullies who would beat me up. And there comes a point in time where I'm going to have some resistance. I'm going to feel defiant, right? Before I've gotten in the fight. But after I've been beat up, there's a point where it's like, all right, look, at some point I have to say, all right. I've had enough. You win. And even if I don't like it, you win, right? And if I live to fight another day, maybe, or something, but like that's just the shame of the situation. Sometimes at some point in time, Gaza's got to accept the fact that they are not going to beat Israel into submission with military. Now they might beat them on the world stage with PR, right? They might be able to get everybody else so wrapped up into this situation that we all feel bad for them and maybe join their side. But the truth is, they're not going to do it by an October 7th. They're not going to do it by preemptively attacking and slaughtering people. That's just never going to win anyone over. So, you guys have any other questions for me? I mean, we talked about Israel for quite some time. I know that I'm not saying that everybody, Israel's by no means perfect, right? They're by no means perfect. But by the same token, largely they have taken, and you should look this up too, Charlie. they've taken outrageous amount of steps to try to protect civilian populations, like from dropping leaflets and flyers and stuff all over the city to tell people when and where they're about to bomb, to making private phone calls to buildings saying, like, get the heck out of there, we're about to blow that thing to kingdom come, to, like, you know, targeting specific places that seem to be unpopulated, to giving people like 20-minute warnings, to, like, roof knockers. Are you guys familiar with roof knockers? There's a type of bomb that Israel drops, that a lot of places do this, where it's like it doesn't damage anything, but it makes this really loud noise, like boom, and then everyone realizes, hey, it's probably about time to, get up out of the building and move, because that's the building that's being targeted. And here's the thing, when you got people hiding amongst the civilian population, right? Enemy combatants hiding amongst the civilian population. They're hiding in schools, they're hiding in churches, they're hiding in basements of apartment buildings. What do? Right? Like, you don't have many options. And one thing that people would say is like, well, they should use special forces. Well, I can tell you from my experience in the military, for those of you who don't know, I'm ex-military. So special forces doesn't work in a situation where there's like 20,000 combatants. Special forces works in situations where there's like 10, 20, maybe 50 or 100 combatants, not 15,000 like Hamas has, right? You can't just send one SEAL team in and round up 15,000 people. That's not how it works, right? All you'd be doing is throwing away a special forces team for no reason. Now, maybe Israel should have done that anyway. Like, maybe they should have thrown away a special forces team to say, look, we tried. But at a certain point, you got to understand that that's not the answer. The answer is you have to systematically route out and catch every enemy combatant that is still in the camp against you, and try to get rid of. I mean, that's just unfortunately the only way to do it. So anyway, that's how I feel about Israel. And again, like, I'm not saying Israel's perfect. They've made plenty of mistakes. But with regard to this conflict, the onus is on Hamas almost entirely. And Hamas, by the way, isn't living in Gaza. They're living in Qatar like kings, right? Like, the Hamas leadership is living filthy rich, fabulously wealthy lives in a nation that they are not even, they're not even run. So, like, when Israel goes in and fights in Gaza, the Hamas they don't have anything to do with that. They don't care, and so what's crazy is the rest of the world acts like Israel is supposed to protect Gazans when Hamas doesn't even protect Gazans, and that's their leadership, right? So, like, that drives me crazy. Like, when Israel's at war with them, and somehow Israel's supposed to do more to protect Gazans than the Hamas leadership, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, I'm right with you, Arvin. I don't understand how anybody can support Hamas, but that's what you do by proxy when you fight again. Have you ever heard the phrase, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Like, if you are the enemy of Hamas's enemy, then you're Hamas's friend. I know it may not seem like it, but like, if someone's out to get Hamas and you're like, no, don't do that, what else is there? So anyway, I think we're wrapping up. I think we're at the point where this, for the most part, we've exhausted the Israeli situation. Is there anything? Hey, my pleasure, Tanya. If there's any other questions you guys have for me, this is, I'll hang out for another couple minutes. If you have any questions at all, just fire away, and or any comments that you want me to address, and I'll be happy to address them. This is now's your chance to. Yeah, right. Enemy of my enemies. Now, it's a shame though, because the truth is that I don't think anybody's really in favor of Hamas. One of the games that's played. Yeah, here I am. I say, like, I've said everything, and then I start talking again. One of the games that's played in the Israel versus Hamas scenario is there's this tennis match, right? It's like, and what will happen is everyone, depending on which side you're on, everyone will want to rewind to the last person to be oppressed, the last person to get hurt, right? So, like, for example, if you're Israel, you'll say, look at October 7th. Look what they did to us. we have to fight, right? But then if you're Hamas, you'll want to rewind a little bit further, and you'll say, look, Israel's occupied us for X years, so we had to provide some resistance. We had to fight. And then if you're Israel, we'll say, well, you kept on attacking us for no reason, so we had to occupy you. And if you're Hamas, you go back again. And so you just go back and back and back until you get to like 1948, or really, thousands of years ago, because this game between Israelites and Muslims has actually been going on for thousands of years. So it's unfortunate that that's the game. But the truth is, if you really started at like 1948, or like even like the early 1900s, where the Zionist movement gained steam, the truth is that the Israelis really didn't have any other place to go, right? The Jews, they needed some place to go because they were being persecuted. They were facing pogroms everywhere, like in Russia and in Germany and everywhere, right? They were facing them everywhere, and Poland and stuff like that. And so they had to find some place to go where they would be safe. And the like 90% of the land that the Israelites currently occupy was bought, not taken, bought from the Turks, from the Ottomans, right? And the Ottomans treated Israelites like second-class citizens, but through proxies, you could perform these back-end deals. You could do these back alley deals that weren't strictly legal, but you could still end up getting land into the hands of Jews, even though technically Jews weren't allowed to own land in the Ottoman Empire. But so like that's what they did. They bought these huge swaths of land and then put them in the name of Jews, which then in 1948, a lot of the Jews went to go claim, they were already living there, many of them, but some of them went to go claim the land that had been theirs for almost a decade. But anyway, I don't know what just happened. I'm back now anyway. But yeah, so like technically this land was all purchased for the most part. And so then you have people will say that like Israel came in and just kicked everybody off their land. Actually, no, but to a large part, the Palestinians, the Arab Muslims that were living there at the time, were told to leave by their own Arab and Palestinian governments. They said, you guys get out because we're about to attack Israel. And that's what happened in 1948. Like literally after Israel declared independence, they're like, all right, you guys get out so we can attack. And everybody attacked Israel right away for no reason, without provocation. They're like, attack, 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 attack. And it was 7 nations on one. And so Israel, of course, fought back and won and just, whopped everybody, and so and then Israel, after conquering a lot of land, gave a lot of it back. They didn't have to, they gave a lot of it back. And so, it starts out in the very beginning with Israel having a legitimate state basically given to them from, France and UK, essentially, because France and UK were the ones that owned the land at the time. And then France and UK were like, we don't want it anymore. And Israel's like, all right, well then, now it's our state, right? Like now that you don't want it anymore and you're leaving, now it's our state. And so a lot of times people don't know the history behind all this, right? So people like assume that Israel came in and just conquered this zone. No, they bought it, right? Like literally purchased it as second-class citizens in an empire that persecuted them, right? And so then from that point forward, every 10 years or so, the Arabs would attack Israel for no reason. And so like after 50 years of being attacked for no reason, then Israel's like, all right, look, if you're going to keep on attacking us, we're going to have to occupy you. And I ask you guys this, don't we do the same thing in America, right? If let's say someone in America keeps on attacking people for no reason, what do? We occupy them, we put them in prison, right? That's what we do. Now, it's a shame that civilians get caught up in this situation because it's really not all Gazans aren't the problem. Although I would say that, bear in mind that there was a study done not long ago where after the October 7th attack took place, they did a poll where it was something like 80% of the Gazans said, cheered it, like, yay, October 7th. Yay, we killed 1,000 Jews. Like, whoa. Right? Like, imagine that, where you have a population where 80% are literally happy to have murdered 1,000 people. That's rough. That's rough. And I mean, can you really blame Israel for wanting to keep that from happening? That's all I ask. Now, I'm not saying they did it perfectly. I'm sure that there were better ways to execute. I mean, war, hindsight is 2020, and war is never going to be a clean, perfect thing. It's just never going to be that. But anyway, I've spewed on long enough. I don't know. If you guys have any other questions, fire away. Yeah, fire away, Tanya. What do you got? Something not pertaining to war or the countries. So yeah, it's tough to really, this is a land dispute, right? And one of the games that's played here too is they'll say that Israel is like you know, that they came and essentially that they're colonialists, right? They came and settled a land that wasn't theirs when if anyone has claim to it, it probably, I mean, I don't really feel like people have claimed a land like that, but if they did, it would be the Israelites because they're the ones that were there first, like 2,500, 3,000 years ago, like a long time ago, right? Like Moses, I think was what, 1300 BC, something around there, like I don't know exactly, but yeah. So Charlie, but you can't blame Israel for British colonialism. That's not a fair thing because Britain left, right? Like yes, Britain took over the land, and I agree that Britain may have. Honestly, I don't know enough British history to know, which parts of the British conquest were legit and which ones aren't. But maybe Britain wasn't supposed to own that land, but Israel didn't do. Israel isn't Britain, so. All right, so Tanya asks, would this enemy of my enemies also apply to an individual? So keep in mind, this is just a phrase, right? It's just a saying. I don't know exactly how true that statement is. It's mostly with regard to statecraft, with regard to, two states discussing who their allies and enemies are, right? Because if you have an enemy as a state, then yeah, you would want to use any allies that you can in the area to help thwart that enemy. Yeah, Charlie, Christianity is only 100 AD, but the Jews predate Christianity by a considerable margin. Yeah, of course, Judaism is probably like, I don't know, maybe 6,000, 7,000 years old, its roots, but it wasn't in specifically Israel, that area, until about 1300 BC, I think. Something around there, 1400 BC. But anyway, so yeah, so who knows exactly how much they. But again, that's a game that I don't. That to me, this is all in the past, right? Like this is kind of like people telling me that Native Americans own America. I'm like, no, they don't. Indigenous populations preceded the indigenous populations that were there. And there were indigenous populations before them, and there were indigenous populations before them. And so this game goes on and on and on forever. You could just never find the winning combination. And then, like, when does that game end, right? There were primates that were like kind of human 1,000,000 years ago. Were they the ones that first owned it? And there were apes before that, and there were like, you could just play this game forever, right? To me, land doesn't belong to humans like that. It belongs to humans individually once you've encountered the property and purchased it in a legal way, right? That's how I feel. Or unfortunately, if they've conquered it, then that's just the reality. Yeah, let's maybe set the abortion debate into a different. I will say that. I will say, Arvin, I do promise that I want to address abortion in a future show. It is a big deal to me. Definitely. For those of you who don't know, I'm relatively pro-life, fairly pro-life, and I mean that across the board, not just with abortion, right? So I'm basically against the death penalty. I'm basically against. I'm essentially pro-life in every way that does not inhibit the right to life, liberty, or pursuit of property of another human being, because I believe that those inalienable rights are constant. So, but yeah, definitely. I think that's good for today, guys. I think we're basically the only people that are even left are like my hardest core, my most staunch supporters. Which thank you guys so much for watching. I think you guys are awesome, and yeah, Tanya, I wish that we could just man, one of these days, wouldn't it be great if like, I have a dream, and it's weird because I'm being a conservative. This is a very like it's a very communistic dream, right? Because in a perfect world, it would be, right? Like on paper, communism is works fine, right? But my dream is kind of like Star Trek, where we basically are already all one world, right? And not even just one world. We're basically like a whole federation of worlds. Like we got lots of different planets, and we're all under one banner. And even there are still divisions, right? Like the Ferengi have their own thing going on, the Klingons, the Romulans have their own thing going on. But there's always going to be those divisions, I'm guessing. But wouldn't it be nice if at least all of Earth were one? That would be pretty cool. It would be awesome. Um, yeah. So Tanya, interestingly enough, this concept of the right to property, the right to pursuit of property, not the right to property itself, but the right to pursuit of property, is a very Christian concept. It comes right from the Bible. Basically, these inalienable rights are derived from John Locke. Basically, is the philosopher that was responsible for a lot of these inalienable rights. He was the first person to coin the phrase life, liberty, and pursuit of property. Now, later, Thomas Jefferson changed it to pursuit of happiness, I think partially because he didn't want to give women the right to property, right? So he was trying to avoid that little neat conundrum. But um, the right to pursuit of property is still foundational in the Bible. It's basically these rights are the rights that you would need to fulfill the mandate of God's will, right? So if you want to do for God, right, then you have to do things like you have to be alive, right? Otherwise, you can't do God's will. Or at least you can do it in heaven, but on earth you can't do God's will. You have to be able to be free to choose God, to have faith, to do God's will, and then you'd also have to um, at least have the right to pursue property so that you can perform charity, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't be able to give property to another. So these rights are based around the concepts that are detailed in Christianity, and so that's why it's carried forward into American tradition. And I believe in these rights, right? Like even though I may not be, Arvin and me go back and forth about Catholicism a lot. I may not be strictly Catholic, but I believe in the rights that spring from the Bible. So I think that's those rights are foundational to American life as well. And I think that these are good rights in the abstract. And while I do hope that we can one day share the world, I don't mean that we shouldn't at some point still have individual property rights. I think that we should just be, able to share the world collectively while we have individual property, right? Like, for example, I have a house, my neighbor has a house right next to me. I feel like we're sharing this community, right? Like, I think that we're still among the same, we're still able to share the land without losing property rights. That's just my personal opinion. I hope that can be the case everywhere. There's more than enough space for us, by the way, like, there's more than enough space for each and every one of us to have our own home about my size, which is not a very it's not a very big home. It's like 1,300 square feet. It's a little baby house, but I'm proud of my little baby. It's my first house I ever owned. So, you never know. Hopefully we'll get there someday. But anyway, I gotta go. It's been real, those with guys. Thanks you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. Guys, we do this every Wednesday and Saturday. Thank you so much for watching, guys. And I'll catch you next time. Common Mansplaining.